Welcome to Learn at Work, a webinar series by the Journal Work. And I'm Jacobs, I'm the founding editor of Work, and I'm delighted that you could be here today. We have a very special webinar. Diana is going to introduce herself as well as tell you about Tyler Clark, who participated in this research. So, Diana, I'm turning it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. I am blessed to be here today to share with you our work that Tyler did as part of his master's project. So the first thing is I just want to introduce myself and Tyler and talk about our backgrounds a little bit. My name's Diana Schwerha. I teach at Ohio University in Industrial and Systems Engineering. This is my 15th year here. And I also direct a NIOSH-funded training project grant in occupational safety. So Tyler, and that's for master's students, Tyler was one of our trainees, and he graduated in 2018. Tyler has had a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then he wanted a little bit more hands-on, so he came over to work with us in safety and industrial and systems. When he was in our program, he completed a summer co-op with the plant safety team at Honda of America Manufacturing in Marysville. And when he was there, he worked on projects related to the emergency shelter ingress and egress program, as well as safety assessments. And the reason why he can't be here, unfortunately, today, because I would much rather have Tyler presenting his own work, but he just started a new position as a quality technician with Elwood National Forge in Corey, PA, and so he's not able to take off work for this. But his work is really interesting, so I'm so happy to be able to present it. So let's start to talk a little bit about the reason for his work. And being a psychology major, Tyler always had questions about everything, which was wonderful. And we had many conversations because my background is in aging and ergonomics. So we would talk about these different cohorts in the workforce and what that meant. And Tyler's perspective was always, sort of from a psychology standpoint and thinking about what did it mean to be in a certain cohort? What kind of values did they have? And how did those values translate into how they accepted messages or participated in certain kinds of activities? So we started talking, and I also was teaching a course one summer on engineering leadership, and part of the reading, which we have a lot of reading in that class, but was about Simon Sinek, who you may know about, and his golden circle. And he talks about the what, the how, and the why. And why, how do you get people really engaged? He's a motivational speaker and he worked in marketing, but he talks about companies like Apple and how did Apple get, really revolutionize computers and iPads and all kinds of technology, the iPhone, right? And so he talks about this what, how, and why. And so when you're trying to communicate to someone, there are different ways you can communicate. You can communicate just the what, like what am I doing? Hey, I'm watching a webinar today. Or you can communicate the how do we do something? So, I might be a company that produces organic food, and so how do we produce our organic food, and how do we source it, and who are the sources, our places that the farmers who we get our food from, and then how do we actually process it, and how does it get to you being really fresh? The how do we operationalize our being? But what Simon Sinek says is it's really more about the why. Why should we do this, right? Why do I care? Why should I do it? And how does that motivate me? And his idea is if you can get to the why, you can get to the person. The what and the how are things that we do and we pay for, and they're part of everything, but to really get to the heart of someone and to get them fully engaged and really changing the culture, you need to get to the why. And particularly he wrote about millennials, which Tyler was all about as a young person himself. So we started to think about, okay, how do we take this question about the golden circle and the why and translate it into some kind of research topic where we study millennials and we also involve safety. So engaging millennials. So the first thing is who are the millennials and what does it take to engage them, right? So there was a quote that by 2024, they'll make up 34% of the labor force. Millennials are individuals born between 1981 and 96. And they are a huge part. Like being an aging, for years I've been talking about the baby boomer generation, and the boomers are individuals who were born between 46 and 1964. And so they started turning 65, retirement age. That's why we were concerned about that in 2011. And the youngest ones will turn 65 in 2029. And so, we're kind of halfway through the boomers starting to turn 65. But now, right behind the boomers are these millennial, this huge generation that's coming through, and they are really changing a lot in the workplace. In between, you have, the Xers, who are this smaller cohort, kind of sandwiched in between. So it's really important. And if you are working with a diverse age population, it's important for employers to find ways to engage them. So engaging has a lot of different aspects to it. They're interested in attracting them to the workplace, which again, this Dr. Jacobs and I were talking about this before we started. This was done pre-COVID, and now attracting to the workplace is totally different, especially for a lot of people who are working remotely. And I think really a lot of people may stay remote. We're realizing that there are a lot of jobs that can be done remotely, and people are happy doing it that way. So how do you attract them? How do you engage them and develop them and retain them? And I think retaining is one of the biggest things, because you'll hear people say that you really make your money when you change jobs, but for a young person, they want to be challenged. And so they go somewhere and then they say, and everything is public, right? So they know what their friends are making, what their friends are doing, everything's posted. And so they go somewhere, and then it's very easy for them to say, oh, you know what, I can go somewhere else. I can be more challenged. I can get a new title. But then we're losing all that corporate knowledge. So retaining is also a big part of the employer's challenge. So what are their values? Okay. So in the literature review, when Tyler started to do his review, he started to talk about their cultural preferences, and two things that came up a lot, and this if you teach too, is that teamwork. Millennials like to work in teams, and this notion of corporate social responsibility, like really feeling like companies need to be socially responsible. There's supply chain, like I'm in safety, so I would like to know that a company's supply chain, that they are treating workers in a good way, in a positive way, in a safe way, and there's safe work practices for companies all along the supply chain. But lots of different aspects to CSR, but that's just one example from my perspective. They may also have a work-life balance. They want meaningful work, right? They want to know that they make a difference, and this comes out a lot. They want that. They want to feel like they've done something. They want advancement. I just talked about that. Frequent feedback is something that if you teach too, you realize that you're not going to have a millennial and probably give them an assignment and have them come back to you 2 or 3 weeks later. A lot of times they want the feedback, they want the discussion. Mentorship, of course, is part of it, and then opportunities. But what Tyler realized when he was doing his review was that little is really known about how these work factors can affect safety engagement. So are they really cultural preferences that are independent of safety and safety on the workforce in the work environment, or are they directly related to it? So he sort of merged those two concepts and developed a study that sought to determine if safety messages aligned with identified millennial work preferences and values. And if you could get to that, if you could effectively engage them in safe work practices. Some background on teamwork. So millennials grew up in a society that emphasized teamwork, especially in high school, sports teams, collaborative classrooms. I mean, even if you look at the way designed for interiors, like professional schools, they're much more collaborative. They're social learners, so social relationships. I think the biggest example of this really is just YouTube, really. Like, what do you do when you want to learn something? You either call your friends or go on YouTube, or call your friends and ask them where they went on YouTube. So it's this social learning and opportunities to learn. They value those kind of relationships. Affiliative. So, in leadership, there's different types of leadership, and one is the affiliative, where you come along someone. And affiliation is a prominent millennial personality characteristic. So you need to build relationships. Again, it ties into the social learners, it ties into the team learners, it ties into social media, it ties into the availability of technology, really to be accessed anytime, anywhere, which thank goodness right now we can do that, so we can all be teaching and working. But the affiliation is really important. So millennials tend to typically score higher in this trait, different than boomers, who are a little more independent and willing to be independent and work that way. But they're pretty risk avoidant. Teams allow you to sort of split up the work and get things done, and not have to say that one person is going to be the end all responsible. So that actually, the risk avoidance part, sort of is a crutch that can prevent them, because they're not always pushed to go out and do things on their own. Civic engagement. So, we talked, if you think about civic engagement and volunteerism, just as a personal example, when I was in high school, like, you may have volunteered, but it wasn't on your, like, a big part of your college application. Now, volunteerism is part of school, like actually part of your requirements for high school in many cases, and on their college application. So civic engagement has been a big part of who millennials are, and really what they've had to, in many cases, had to do it as part of their school. So they have a strong affinity for it, and their need to change the world. There have been a lot of, like, even if you look at some companies that are out there that are, saving plastic in the ocean, or Tom's, and I'm not endorsing any one company, but I'm just thinking of things off the top of my head, companies that you buy something and then they give to something else. I mean, even like, it's almost everywhere. So this change the world, help the world, be involved in positive things going on in the world are a big part of their work. And they had a heightened awareness, right? The internet is much easier. It's much easier to find out what's going on 12 hours from wherever you are. So they have a heightened awareness of social issues. And they know about catastrophic events, natural disasters. It's news on your phone as soon as it happens. And even though the risk avoidance part is a little bit different from the boomers oftentimes grew up in another turbulent environment in the 60s, where there was an emphasis for them on civil rights. And so they do share that, they can share that social responsibility and concern for society. So they can really mesh with those baby boomer parents on those aspects. This is a chart on corporate social responsibility. So things like, what do millennials, okay, so we know what corporate social responsibility is, but how do they live that sort of in their life? So do they take consideration into when they make decisions, when they buy or where they work? Do they believe that companies have an obligation to do this? So millennials, like for instance, a company's social, where to work, 76% versus 58% on the average. They want to have CSR practices in a company, that's higher, 64%. They seek out responsible products, 85%. So if you look at these, the millennials are all higher on the CSR metrics than the US average population. That was from 2016 study. So this notion of CSR and millennials and them seeking out either in their workplace, like seeking out in their workplace, seeking out where they live, seeking out what they buy, seeking out how they interact with others is part of who they are. And they value things, they favor companies that are like them, who, you know, they share, they're aligned, right? It's not unusual. We tend to hang out with people and favor people who were aligned on the same values. So what did he do? So Tyler designed a lab study, and it was 15 males and 15 females. You can see the average age, sort of low 20s. They were students at Ohio University. This was done, and it was approved through our institutional review board, of course. And what he thought he would, what he did, and he wanted to link how they perceived certain safety training with how they felt about engagement and teamwork. So he sort of wanted to separate these three things out. And we had always, well, anyone really, like I think anyone who's gone through safety training has gone through good or bad safety training. So you have, you know, you all have your sort of stories about watching things and how to be engaged, or whether you were engaged or whether you were not engaged by the training. So he said, okay, I'm going to do a training, and I'm going to bring students in. I'm going to have these pre-assessment scales, and then they're going to go through 3 different safety presentations. One is a control, which was designed like your typical training. You know, here's a training. He decided to do it on musculoskeletal issues in lifting. You know, here's our policy towards lifting. Here's some training on musculoskeletal risk, and very straightforward. No connection to teamwork, no connection to CSR. And then he also designed, and I'll show you in the presentation in a few slides, one presentation that was clearly more focused towards teamwork, and one that was focused towards CSR. And he had terms for these. So the teamwork one was Together We Are Strong, and the CSR one had a mission to improve, to serve those, and the power to heal. So you'll see that, you know, he presented these on all the slides when he presented the messages. Then the students went through, and it was randomized, the order that they watched the presentations. They watched the presentations, and then they had a rated response survey on 5 questions. And then they had open response questions. I said survey, but they're questions. And 5 of them we look at in this presentation. There were also 3 at the end that were more concerned about just the students' preferences towards safety, and wasn't really involved in this analysis. These are the scales that we used. We used the team attitude scale for their predilection to be a team player, and then civic engagement, which actually has 2 parts to it. It has the civic attitude scale, and it has the civic behavior scale. So sort of, how do I think about something with regard to engagement, and then how likely am I to act on something, behavior. The company and position was, participants were given a hypothetical position as a warehouse worker. So they were told, okay, you're a warehouse worker, you're going into this company supplies medical supplies and devices. And they were told that they would view 3 versions of the safety presentation. As I mentioned, they were randomized, and this was all done through Qualtrics. So all the videos were presented in a random order through Qualtrics. Okay, let me just. So the safety, I just want to make sure. Okay, safety messages. It was basically this. It was the same message for all 3, which you'll see, like, we wanted that to control that, because we didn't want to have 3 messages that the individual may have had more or less information, like personal background on. But when you watch 3 messages in a row, there was probably a little bit of a fatigue factor too, but they were randomized to try to reduce any bias from that. And they were pre-recorded. And as I mentioned, there was a control presentation. Then there was one that had a teamwork emphasis. So it discussed the company focus on teamwork and expressed the teamwork approach to their safety program. And then there was a CSR, which discussed the company's societal impact and how the employees' role, like what role they play, and in that societal impact. So the company really felt like they contributed to that cause. And this, it's, in your own work how there are sort of events that happen, they all kind of tie together. At the same time Tyler was doing this, I had in one of our engineering management classes a student who worked for a large fertilizer company. And he absolutely loved the CEO of his company. And he said his CEO would always keep people engaged because his CEO's topic was they feed the world, because they create fertilizer, they make fertilizer, but the fertilizer goes to all these different countries that enables the countries to produce really good volume on their farms and their food, and enables more food to be produced and more people to eat. And so this CEO was all about, it wasn't just about making fertilizer, it was about feeding the world. That's the kind of idea that was meant to come through in this last presentation. So it wasn't just like working for like a medical company, it was like working a medical company that keeps people alive. So your job every day and going to work and staying safe at work enables the company to do well. And when the company does well, they're producing these supplies that keep people alive. So, it wasn't just tied to, hey, I need to get these products out the door. It's like, I need to get these products out the door because that's keeping other people alive, and I'm part of that. Here's 2 examples of some slides. You can notice the first one is the teamwork, and at the bottom of each one was their little tagline, and so that was a constant reminder. But it was together we are strong, and I have to say Tyler did all these, he developed all these ideas. It was terrific. It was so much fun to work with him. But so why is lift safety important? And you notice serious and possible long-term injuries to not only to you but to a coworker, loss of personnel that the warehouse team depends on, prohibits a group from meeting production. You see a picture of a team. And then before you lift, what do you see? You see like a huddle, right? You see a huddle and you assess the load. What does it weigh? Decide together if you're going to lift it. And so everything in this message was about, hey, we're going to approach safety and we're going to do it as a team and we're going to be safe as a team. And that was it. The CSR, you notice, had very different images. So you see the hands together on the left, but it's important because it's a long-term injury. And then if we get injured, it's a loss of resources for helping patients and less health products delivered to customers in need. So it was really, the message was sort of transferred over to who is getting our product and why is lift to safety important, PPE, assessing the task, safe lifting. Even in the introduction, what you see is not just, normally you would see why is lift safety important, you'd see a person in the warehouse. That wasn't it. Again, it was the message was transferred over to who are we helping. So we're helping these children who may have, perhaps cancer, an older person at the end of life, or individuals in different countries, perhaps in third world countries that really need our resources, and we can't let them down. So totally different messages. And the control, just imagine a normal safety presentation. That's what that was. Okay, so I'm going to show you the survey in a second, but there were 5 statements after they watched them, and they were Likert scales, and they either agreed or disagreed. And then after that, there were questions where the 5 questions were, we call them open-ended, but basically they were a question, and then they were asked to say which presentation ranked highest on that. So they had to choose. That was like a forced choice. You'll see that. And then 3 questions after that was about their personal safety and just the presentations, if they liked them. Basically, we're not discussing this, but the one thing that the students liked was that they weren't long, which kind of made me laugh. But they liked the fact that they were sort of brief. And they were, I think, 7 to 8 minutes apiece. So they weren't super brief, but they weren't, your 30 or 40-minute presentation. All right, so these are the 5 questions. This is how this was done on Qualtrics, and you can see that rate the extent, and the video would motivate me to work safety. The video would motivate me to work safely, presented information in a manner I can relate to. I could see myself working for this company. I find this presentation interesting and easy to participate, or easy to pay attention to. And I feel that this presentation in general would motivate my peers to work safely. So, sort of questions related. What he was trying to get at was, can the person put themselves in there and feel like they're part of that team? Can they relate to it? Can they pay attention to this training? And would it really help people transform their behavior and work safely? Which is as safety, that's always our goal, right? If I don't transform behavior, I'm not doing my job probably. So pre-assessment surveys, I put the note that the potential points for each of these scales, and these were just across all of the individuals. So the teamwork was a 54 out of a possible 75. The CEA, which is the attitude scale, engagement on attitudes, was a 44 out of 56. And the behavioral civic engagement with behaviors was a 27 out of a 42. And just so you know, and just as a reminder, civic engagement surveys made up of 2 different components. We did not, we kept them separate as the CEA and the CEB. CEA has to do with attitudes. CEB has to do with behaviors. And they ranged from anywhere from 8 to 5 questions. And they were Likert scales, which is how you get, actually, the first one was a 15 question scale that each question had a Likert scale of 5, and the other 2 were either 8 or 6 with a 7-point Likert scale. So that's how you get to those points. These are just means, like summary statistics on the various questions, and you can kind of see overall that these team and CSR questions are higher. Okay, but what we're going to find is, but we were wondering, so you can sort of, this is a little bit of a preview that those are a little bit higher. So this, they are viewing those questions and they are answering those questions in a more favorable way for the team and CSR over the control. All right, and then the statements, and I'm going to read, since I don't have the question exactly on there, I am going to read what this is. So statement 1 was, the video motivates me to work safely. And again, what you're going to find on here, that's the only one that was significant. The other ones had some significant covariates. So we used these pre-assessment surveys as covariates in it. 2 was the information I can relate to. 3 related to themselves working in that company. 4 was they thought the presentation was interesting, and 5 was it would motivate me to work safely. So, you have a marginal, like given our small sample size, this is sort of marginal, but only from a strictly 0.05 significance level, only statement 1 was significant. And if you look at statement 1, and as a reminder, the video would motivate me to work safely, a very kind of clear-cut question. When we did the post-hoc test for that, the control was lower from the CSR and the teamwork message. So it's basically saying that there was no significant difference between the CSR and the teamwork answers for those presentations, but the control was lower. So they were rating what I would call the alternative presentation methods as higher than the control. Okay, Then we had these other, we call them open response survey questions. There were 5 questions, and what we wanted them to do was to say, choose the one that ranked highest on that. So if you look at these answers, right, so 4 and 15 and 11 equals 30. So each person had to say which one of these, the control, the teamwork, or the CSR, like for the first one, which presentation motivated you to work safely and why? And they gave some qualitative answers, which again, like I said, I don't have those in here, but so the one that motivated them most was the teamwork. The presentation, which presentation did you think had the best message? CSR, but teamwork kind of close. What you notice, for the most part, except for this last one, for the first, or this is kind of a mixed one, there, the control is lower. Which presentation did you think was most relatable and why? Again, this is a tie. So in terms of how do you relate, which presentation did you think took the best approach to safety? And this is, from a safety person, this is interesting because an approach point, like how do I approach safety? And there's been so much work over the last couple of decades really on behavioral-based safety, which is all about working with others, and having, a team and a buddy and being aware. So this team approach was clearly the highest. Oh my. Okay. I have no idea what I just did. Let's do this. Sorry about that. And then which presentation held your attention? And that was the CSR. So again, that's kind of interesting. Which approach, teamwork had the highest count, but kept your attention, CSR had the highest count. So this, as we start looking at the data with Tyler when he did this, we just kept having fun with it because it kept sort of revealing different ideas to us. So our next question was, well, what happens if we just pull those, right? So we pull, instead of having the CSR and the teamwork and the control, what happens if we pull the CSR and the team together and we just say basically control and then versus alternative presentation? And that changed our results. So we found that there were actually now 3 statements that were significantly different. And the first one came up again at a higher significance level. The statement 3, based on safety values, I could see myself working for this company. So, remember we talked about how do you engage millennials? Well, attracting them is a big part. So, and keeping them is a big part. So how do I see them working for them? And then 5, would it motivate me to work safely? I need to be able to sustain this. And there's so much in safety about sustaining, right? I can get someone excited for a day, but I need to keep them excited for their career. The post-hoc tests on this all showed, if you look at these results, that the scores were lower on the control for all 3. So this means that when I pulled those alternative messages, teamwork or CSR, I was getting higher scores for those questions than the control on all 3 of those questions, right? So if I just go up for a second, the alternative message motivated them more. It made them more so that they could work for the company, and the alternative presentations were felt to motivate them more. So we thought that was pretty interesting too, that it confirmed that difference. And so at this point, we had 3 out of our 5 questions that were significant and the millennials were really responding as they should, right? We've set this whole study up based upon the fact that millennials are team players and that they feel that CSR is an important part about who they are. All right, so the results section. 1, 3, and 5, as I mentioned, were significant, and they reflect also the ratings, the open response survey ratings that showed a strong preference towards teamwork and corporate social responsibility. However, when you looked at the responses, and excuse me, I'm going to go back up to that slide, this slide. When you looked at this, it wasn't uniformly one or the other. You know, like the teamwork approach was good for an approach to working safety. The CSR approach was good for holding your attention, which again, Tyler, and I'm sure he had many hours on this, was thinking about how do those relate? So how do I take these messages and map them onto certain constructs on how I want to engage my employees and then how I want them to work? And so getting back to what sort of started the whole study in the beginning of the why, the teamwork principles satisfied more of the how. So how do I go about safety? Well, I go about in a team approach. I want to keep my coworkers safe. I want them to make sure I'm accountable, and we want to make sure, and as team players, we're creating a culture of how to do things safety. You know, not just one person is walking around trying to make sure people are safe. That's a definitely antiquated view, but we all are in this. And then the why, the CSR principle of why am I doing something? What's the higher purpose behind it, right? So the keeping the one question about does it grab my attention? Well, sure, because things that I care about are going to grab my attention. They're going to engage me. I want to watch it more. And so thinking about who we are as a company and why we're doing something provides some higher purpose. So we were thinking that maybe, so what this resulted in is when you're conveying messages or trying to brand things, and that you may need both of these. You may need to bring in both of these in terms of your messaging. And like I said, this was all done pre-COVID, and so this was all done before we were all online for everything. And so I think it's even more timely now. But so future research, this was all done as a convenience sample with students. And so I think there could be a lot more work done on messaging with specific attention to safety engagement. So a field study of millennial workers employed by a company and performing the actual training. If you know, we did not ask the students who came in exactly how many had ever really seen a video, one of these videos, or who had done lifting. So, you know, when you've done something and you watch something, it's usually more meaningful because you've been in that position. And then some kind of cross-sequential method that would gather pre and post assessment data of samples before and after viewing value aligned or controlled safety messages. So we had questions afterwards, but we didn't do pre and post assessment. So to see if anything changed. And we could also collect data from accident rates, performance reviews, and there could be a stronger effect, I'm sorry, that's a mistake, effect when participants are more familiar with and involved in the company. And then we didn't combine the messages. So that would be a natural follow-up to this study, in that how do you combine them and when do you combine them? And obviously you can't just combine a message and not live it out. So the company would have to be doing that. You know, how do you sustain the message? So lots of follow-up for people at work who are doing training. And also having, I think that the other part of this follow-up work is having individuals who are different ages and different experience levels do the training. You know, a lot of times, we've all been through it, that you have someone giving some kind of keynote address who has been through a life-changing event, and they want to share that, and they want to make sure that you don't have to go through that event. And so that happens a lot. And so having some kind of having this kind of embedded into a more diverse, layered kind of training would also be very interesting. Although the more you do, the harder it gets to sort of tease out all the effects, but it would be fun. And okay, so that's my last slide. It's about 1:40, so there's time for questions.
There are. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions here. We've got a full audience, which is lovely. Sue wrote, my experience is that millennials are keen to be independent and their own bosses and pretty entrepreneurial. Like you say, they are very environmentally aware. Is this what you found?
Well, okay, so what we found, there's two ways. One is the literature and one is just in the 30 students. I can say from my own experience, we have more competitions in engineering now. So we do have, since I started, more students who maybe want to start their own companies. That's the entrepreneurial, so from a personal standpoint. The students who did this experiment, we didn't ask them questions like that. I do think that the environmental part it's definitely a part of CSR. So Sue's comment about like they're concerned about the environment, that's a huge part of CSR, and it would reflect on that.
Thank you. Let me ask a question. You started talking a little bit about this being done before COVID. So what do you think you'd see different if you were just starting the study now?
Oh, that's a good question, and a lot of us, we are all talking about things that are done pre and post COVID. Well, one of the questions I would have is, you engage a lot of times in safety. So from a safety perspective, let's think about one of the things that I feel is one of the most differences about work is that some of us have the luxury of working remotely and some of us don't have the luxury of working remotely. Okay, that's a big divider right now. Not a divider, but it's just the reality. I mean, we may all be working, like all of us on this webinar could be remote as we join in together. So when you're in a normal situation, you could do training where I have someone in the room and we're together and we're at a site and we can tour the site, or I can tour multiple sites and I can see how things are operating outside of my own area. So as a more specific example, say I work for a very large company, and normally I might be in the office building, but okay, so this actually happened to me with a student who's looking for a job. He's going to be in a certain building, but he's working perhaps for a hospital. Normally, he would be able to tour that entire hospital, see lots of different processes that are not relevant to maybe his own specific world in order to provide a background to who the company is. Well, now that's going to be very limited. They may not be able to do that. And so how does a company kind of share all that information that they would have shared in person, but now it's remotely? And how do they express those ideas when you can't just walk around and see people doing things, in a positive way? So branding and messaging remotely is the images that we see and the communication that we see is going to be that much more important, because you're not going to be able to get that frame of reference like we used to. I hope this doesn't last forever. I mean, honestly, I'm saying this, but I would kind of like to go back. I haven't been on a plant tour since like all year, and it's really hard because the students, we're used to going out and we can't do that anymore. So in terms of training, it's the same thing. You would train and you might show people lots of different elements of the company, but you're going to be limited. So how do I communicate that when they can't always see it? So I do think it's important to share those, if those are important, to share those messages virtually.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and I agree. It will be nice to go back to being able to physically see each other and back to whatever our new normal will be. Couple of questions. What would be your follow-up work from this study? What would you like to do next?
Follow-up? Well, the one thing that I would really, okay, there's a couple of different ways I could see running with this. One of the things would be is to prospectively follow some young people who are looking for jobs and be able to do all the pre-assessment work that we do, the covariate work, and then see, like from a hiring perspective, which jobs they apply to and how they make their job choice based on that. So that would be like pre-getting the job. Like, are we doing this, and is it really affecting where they work, or when it comes down to it, is it more about money, or is it more about location or something else? So like, how really strong is that messaging in their choice of a job? And I would try to then do the same thing with retaining individuals. Of the individuals, younger people who stay or who choose to leave, what role does teamwork or what role does CSR play in that? And then from a safety perspective, it would be great to just look at, both leading and lagging indicators. So let's look at some companies and let's modify the messages. And again, this is kind of like, they hate to have a control when the control isn't as good as the other ones, but it would be, of course, people do this every day, so it's not inadequate. It's just perhaps not as multi-layered. But let's just see what happens. Like, if I have a message about lifting and I have a teamwork approach, let's see if I can have some leading indicators about lifting and see if the people who go through that training actually do that. This is just I don't want to say just, but this was a lab study on just messaging. It would be nice to see if the messaging actually affected behavior. I mean, the only way to do that would be to have people see different types of messaging and then watch their actual behavior over the course of 3, 6, 9 months, something like that. That's when you'd actually be able to say, hey, not only did we see their preferences, but it actually changed something at work. So could be lots of really, and I'm always looking for PhD students. So if anyone's on this webinar who sees it, who is interested and wants to follow up, I'd be interested in chatting with you. But that would be a fun thing to do. And again, I think this is really interdisciplinary because it's engineering in terms of safety and operations, but it's also HR in terms of hiring and retaining. So it crosses both of those boundaries.
Yeah, I agree. So one last question, and this again has been so incredibly informative and fascinating. Funding, easy to come by for you. What is your dream of a study?
Okay, so if I didn't have to worry about it, if someone was just giving me money.
Every researcher's dream.
Well, it would definitely be a prospective study, and it would be prospective, and it would be cross industry and different age groups. So where you could start out looking at hires in, say, distribution, manufacturing, healthcare, and then follow people through the hiring and the work, and also link this. So one of the things in ergonomics, we know that the work environment is not the only thing that keeps people at work or wants them to leave, but we never quite know the turnover, what it is. And so it'd be nice to be able to have this prospective study, different age groups start, think about where they get hired, and then when they're in these different disciplines or industries, how the messaging and how the cultural changes, whether the culture is about teamwork or CSR or both, how those are affecting both their health and how long they stay with the company. All right, because kind of like a total worker health kind of idea. If I have a excuse me, if I have a person and I have a good safety culture and they're happy, are they healthier as well as injury free, and they don't turn over, and they're not likely to leave the company? I mean, those are like triple wins. So
Great.
that would be. So anyone have any ideas about where I could get that funding? That would be fun. But I would need like 50 people to work with.
Yeah, I don't have any suggestions, but I love what you were thinking would be, a study that you could do that would be really, really helpful, insightful. Any last words you want to share as we get ready to conclude today's webinar?
Well, I would just like to thank you first, Dr. Jacobs, for inviting Tyler and I to talk, and I'm sorry you couldn't be here because it was really it was a delight to work with him. He was just really curious all along the way about the whole project. And I just think that there's more work to be done in this area. You know, my whole goal is about keeping people healthy at work. And if this is one part of that puzzle, then, you know, and we can see that there's more work to be done, I would encourage everyone to, if you're interested, either just go run with it, or if you're interested in someone to partner with, give me a call.
Do you want to share your email or how they can contact you?
Yeah. My email is just my last name, so it's SCHWERHA, Schwerha at ohio.edu.
Great. Thank you so much for this really informative Learn at Work webinar. And everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll have this posted on the workjournal.org website. So if you want to refer to it, you can. And Diana, thank you for publishing in Work. And we look forward to more submissions from you and your colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacobs.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.